The book that this is based on, You Should Have Known, it focused more on the fact that you have this psychiatrist, Grace, who, despite being able to counsel various people that they should have known that their spouses would cheat on them, they should have known the various faults that their spouses had or would have, that she herself went into this relationship with Jonathan, who clearly is sociopathic and narcissistic and has all these issues and is even homicidal, that she went into this relationship and didn't realize what he was truly like. She didn't realize his true nature, and she should have known. And I think if the story had focused more on that it would be a little bit less of a bummer in the finale, that the twist is, as some of you have so astutely put it, that there is no twist, that the suspect that was the most obvious is the killer, and that's Jonathan. And I think that the show is pretty entertaining throughout, and I can't say I was overly disappointed in the finale, but I have to say it didn't really leave a lasting impact on me, and I think this is gonna be pretty quickly forgotten because it didn't really wow people at the end. I do think, a lot of what is going to win this series goodwill is Hugh Grant's performance as Jonathan. My wife and I were watching this, and I turned to her and I said, Hugh Grant is, and she said, yes, he is the one who is selling every aspect of this character, because a lot of the things that we believe about him come down to like one look that Hugh Grant gives. Like, it's not terribly developed in the script. We don't get to see a lot of the aspects of his character because we see much more of the mask that Jonathan wears than we see of his true character. But Hugh Grant will have these scenes where he'll just make one face and you will totally believe everything bad that has been said about him. And it's amazing to me that he manages to spend so much of the series being so convincing. You never really like the guy, but you don't realize just how evil he could be. The fact that he committed such a brutal murder, and in true HBO fashion, we get to see every brutal moment of this murder in the finale. I thought it was an interesting decision to intercut it with the car chase where Jonathan is taking Henry away and the police are chasing in hot pursuit, and so is Grace and her father in the helicopter. I thought that was an interesting decision to intercut it this way. It definitely increased the tension. And it was interesting because part of me was even wondering, is he going to leave right up to the moment that he took the hammer and started to kill her? Because it just seemed so unfathomable that he was actually the killer this whole time after the front that he had put on. Now, Noah Jupe very astutely, I think, realized that this outcome was going to be disappointing to some people, and he said in an interview that, despite the fact that some of you will have guessed the ending, what you need to realize is that this finale is going to take you on a journey that is going to make the whole story worth it. And I think what he's talking about is Grace's journey in this episode. And I will admit that this was an interesting twist. Again, I feel like it got a little bit short shrift. I would have liked to see some of the background scenes. Like, I would have liked to see what she said to her friend played by Lily Rabe. I would have liked to see what she said to her father, what she said to Henry in more detail. But I think that, you can read between the lines. Now, this was a little confusing, but if you aren't completely sure what happened, it seemed to me anyway, and I think that this is the general consensus about what happened, that Grace, when she talked to Jonathan's mother and she saw that he was willing to even potentially accuse their son of being the killer, even though it's obviously not the case that Henry is the killer, and he, for his part, knows that Henry is not the killer. But the fact that he would be willing to cast doubt on their son in order to, get himself off, that realization that she needs to be rid of him. So she very, very cleverly gets the defense attorney to put her on the stand so that what she says can be admissible in the trial. And then has her friend, played by Lily Rabe, go to the prosecuting attorney and gives her the right questions to ask her. And, this scene is probably the highlight of the character of Grace and the highlight of Nicole Kidman's performance in the show, as she pretends to not want to tell these things about her husband and then puts him in the worst possible light. And her performance in this scene, it was very, very subdued, and you could believe that she honestly didn't think that Jonathan was capable of this act if you didn't see in advance what was actually going on. And it wasn't completely clear to me. I suspected that she had arranged all this before, but the moment when it became completely clear to me was the moment when she linked arms with Lily Rabe and Donald Sutherland as she left the courtroom. So to me, this was the powerhouse moment for Nicole Kidman. This show really didn't give her enough opportunities to shine. An actress of her caliber, I really feel like she could have had some better material to work with, but she did a very good job in this scene. And I would argue that the character arc of being this woman who at the beginning of the show is completely deluded and believes that she has a loving relationship with her husband, doesn't realize that he doesn't love the family, that he just loves that they love him, coming from that perspective to the final realization that they're better off without him, and being willing to intentionally cause him to be convicted of murder. Now, he did commit this murder, and there is a sense, I think some of these sequences where they would show her imagining the murder being committed and she would imagine Elena. These sequences I think were intended to show that she was feeling guilt and that she was feeling disturbed by the nature of the crime that Jonathan had committed. And, my wife at one point turned to me and said, if it's not Grace, then I'm going to be very, very disappointed, because they always show her right when they show these flashbacks. But I think the point of these sequences was not to show that she was the killer, not that she had dissociative identity disorder, which seems to clearly not have been the case. Now that we've seen the flashback of Jonathan committing the murder, we can rule that possibility out, I think. But to show that this murder was weighing on her and the guilt of her complicity in it if her husband was guilty. In this episode, as they covered up this piece of evidence that very, very conclusively would seem to indicate that Jonathan was the murderer, she has to finally grapple with that, and to grapple with whether or not her having this continuation of the family unit is worth justice not being served in this case. And the decision that she makes, that's a very, very powerful character arc, her finally deciding to show strength of character and strength of purpose and put an end to her affiliation with Jonathan. So that was a powerful scene, and I think, for me personally, the highlight of the episode. Now, they did, they amplified the melodrama at the end. They had this chase scene, which, you got to see some really, really good acting from both Noah Jupe and from Hugh Grant. I think they were both very, very good here. I think that particularly Noah Jupe's acting, you could just see the fear in his eyes. And that moment where he says, "Dad, you killed a woman. You killed an innocent woman." That was just a powerful moment. And you see Jonathan realizing through Hugh Grant's performance that, the only person who had been completely on his side up to this point, the person who had been willing to cover up evidence for him, no longer believes in him. And just as this person who is so egotistical, so narcissistic, that final rejection just puts him over the edge. And then all his actions in that final sequence, as he shows very, very clearly that he doesn't care about his son, as he puts his life in jeopardy repeatedly. It was a very, very dramatic sequence. It was kind of outrageous, but I feel like they felt like they had to end this show on this kind of note or risk people being disappointed, because there wasn't really a jaw-dropping moment in the finale that you could point to. So they kind of, I feel like, had to do this. I'm kind of surprised they didn't give Edgar Ramirez more to do in this show. He's a great actor. He's shown quite well during his brief scenes, but he kind of just faded off into the background as the show neared its conclusion. Noma Dumezweni, she made some kind of blunders this week. I think that, it's understandable why she could believe Grace, but to put her on the stand in this situation was clearly a drastic miscalculation, and her reactions when things started to go horribly wrong and her repeated objections that were really, really feeble and just showed how concerning these developments were. I think that those were clearly mistakes on her part because it showed the jury that what was happening was not good for Jonathan. And I realized that it was a last-ditch effort because she saw the whole thing going south. But up till that point, she hadn't played a hand wrong. Her interrogating, or rather her asking questions of the Alves boy on the stand of this episode, the way she did that with gentleness, but casting the father in the worst possible light. You know, she's really done a good job as an attorney up to this point, but she very much did not manage to acquit Jonathan. It's very obvious that he's going to get a guilty verdict if the trial ever reconvenes. So, you know, I have to say that as a finale, this was okay. I feel like it ended kind of abruptly. I expected there to be a little bit more. The scene on the bridge, Nicole Kidman's reaction, her melodramatic acting as she runs to try and save Henry from Jonathan as he's standing on the edge of this bridge about to commit suicide in front of his son, seemingly. Although I doubt he would have actually committed suicide because he's too narcissistic for that. He's just trying to get attention, I think, I would argue. But this scene, you know, end of the episode, I feel like it just needed a little bit more after that because I don't think there's quite enough here for another season of this. I don't think they should do a Big Little Lies season 2 situation. I think this would be even worse than that if they did an Undoing season 2. I see, you know, they could explore potentially, they didn't explore a lot how this would affect her status in the community and how she would rebuild herself in the wake of this revelation about Jonathan. Probably in a large part because we didn't know that Jonathan was guilty up until the finale. But I have to say, I just don't think there's enough there for a second season. I feel like there were some things that we should have gotten to see, like what happened with the Alves family after this. We didn't really get to see how he would react after he finds out that Jonathan has been, you know, was the killer and that he was guilty. We didn't get to see his reaction to that, to the guilty verdict. We didn't get to see how the family will move forward. We didn't really get to see what will happen to Jonathan's daughter with Elena. And, you know, to a large extent, I just feel like we needed to see a couple more scenes of Grace and Henry rebuilding their lives. And you could argue that this is messy like real life. I think Nicole Kidman said something to that effect in the after show that she likes this ending because it's kind of true to life. But I personally feel this is a TV show. Give people a little bit more closure. So those are my thoughts on the season finale, possibly the series finale of The Undoing. It has been called a miniseries, but HBO calls everything a miniseries these days. Whether they have potential for a season 2 in place or not, they will call it a miniseries. So there could be more. I genuinely hope that there isn't because I just don't think there's enough story, and I think that I would definitely not tune in. But let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you'd tune in for a second season if there was one. Let me know how you reacted to the final revelations, if you found it satisfying or if you didn't think it went quite far enough. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. As always, thanks for watching, and please subscribe if you're interested in seeing more reviews on this channel like this one.